Hey guys, so did this video with Aliyah Return Center and Chaim Mailspin, director, talking about the calendar, talking about the Pentecost, Shavuot date, timing, and it brought up a few questions. People brought in some questions asking me and texting me, emailing me after, so I went ahead and posted some frequently asked questions on my website at JerusalemTabernacleOfDavid.org, JTOD.org. So that article is there. And so I just wanted to post a little video to kind of live answer some of these questions as well. One of them was, why isn't Pentecost always on a Sunday? Well, the reason that the one viewpoint had it always landing on a Sunday is because they misunderstood the passage in Leviticus where it says that you start counting the 50-day count on the day after the Shabbat. So the mistake there is thinking that it's talking about the weekly Shabbat. It's not. The Passover holiday is a Shabbat. It's treated like a Shabbat. There's no work that is to be done on that. It happens yearly, and the other Shabbat is happening weekly. But they're both referred to in the Bible many times as Shabbat. So in the context, in Leviticus 23, it is saying that the counting of the Omer starts the day after Passover, which is the first day of unleavened bread, which is the 15th day of the first month. So the evening of Passover is late afternoon on the 14th day, and then the first day of unleavened bread is the 15th day. So the counting of the Omer, which is the grain offering, the Omer measurement of grain offering, which is the 50 days, that begins on the 16th day. And this is confirmed by the historian Josephus, who wrote about this in the 1st century. Sure, there was in Judaism a conflict about this, but it was a minority view saying that it meant to start the counting the day after the weekly Shabbat. And that was debunked within Judaism before Yeshua was born. So the majority Jewish view continued, even according to Josephus, that the count begins on the 16th day. So if, on the other hand, you start the count the day after the weekly Shabbat, then for sure, 50 days is always going to have you land on a Sunday. One question is if that's what Elohim really meant, then why didn't he say Shavuot is going to be so many Sundays after the beginning of the year? It'll be on a Sunday, this many Sundays, right after the beginning of the year. That would be easy. Or he could have said, close to Passover, count this many Sundays from Passover. He could have done it that way. On the other hand, the rabbinic calendar does have the count starting on the 16th of the first month, but it always lands on the 6th day of the 3rd month. Why? Because the rabbinic Hillel II calendar decided ahead of time, only starting in the year 359, but they decided ahead of time what the length of each month is going to be. And it's an alternating pattern, 29 days, 30, 29, 30, 29, 30. Well, in reality, we don't really know if it's going to go 29, 30, 29, 30 in an alternating pattern like that. It could go 29, 29, 30, 29, 30, 30, 30, 29. It could go anything. Each year is likely to be quite different from the year before, quite different from prior years. You just don't know. A lunar month, a lunar cycle, that's the origin of the word month, is month. A lunar cycle is anywhere from 29.27 days per lunar cycle, all the way up to 29.8 days per lunar cycle. It averages out to be around 29.5. So when you have that average, and you have that kind of a span from 29.3 to over 29.8 days, that's a difference of quite a few hours. When you have that type of lunar cycle, and that's just the way it is, then your month is sometimes going to end up being 29 days, sometimes being 30 days, and you just don't know. But when we trust Elohim and we just go about it with his plan, it all balances out. It's just really wonderful the way that there's all these corrections that are just built in without having to do a lot of calculations. It's really quite simple. So the rabbinic Hillel 2 calendar is not the answer either. They start the counting on the 16th of the month. That's different than the Roman Christian calendar, which has it always starting on a Sunday, starting the count of the 50 days. Always starts on a Sunday, and it's going to end on a Sunday. The Rabbinic 2 calendar has one part of it, correct, always starting on the 16th day of the month. Doesn't matter what day of the week it is. But because they predetermined the length of each month ahead of time, that is always going to land on the 6th of Sivan, otherwise known as the 6th day of the 3rd month. But the months are not predetermined as being 29 or 30, 29, 30, and it's not following any kind of man-made pattern of how the 29, 30s will happen. What we do is we go according to the conjunction. When the earth is lined up with the sun and the moon is hidden in the shadow of the earth, that is easy to calculate, even for the ancient people, to within minutes of accuracy. That lineup and that complete shadow means that the moon is going to be hidden completely in the shadow, and that's called the dark moon. It's also known as the conjunction, when the lineup has occurred. And that is a dark moon. You cannot see it. It's invisible, but it's possible to know it by calculation. When you start counting the month from that point, you have no more arguments about when to start the month. And it's the same for the entire planet. It is a global event when that lineup occurs. When you go with starting the month by the first visible sliver, then two problems happen. First of all, you get all kinds of arguments because at different longitude, different latitude, different visibility, different amount of smog in the air, different amount of clouds, different amount of dust in the air, you may or may not be able to see that sliver. Different positions on the globe. You may see it in one place and not see it in another. So are they going to start counting the month in that part of the planet, but not counting the beginning of the month in a different part of the planet? That brings a lot of problems. Whereas when you have the conjunction, you've got one global event for the entire planet, and that is the conjunction. And from that, you can start the month. The other issue is that when you start the conjunction, you start the month from the conjunction, Passover is always going to land on a beautiful full moon. And that agrees with tradition, which says that the children of Israel started walking out of Egypt under a full moon. And that's amazing because that means that Elohim provided light for them and the coolness of night in temperature and plenty of light to walk so that their feet would not stumble as they begin their journey, walking out from Egypt in freedom under a full moon. That's what tradition says, that they were walking out starting in the night of Passover under a full moon. Now, the only way that Passover, starting in the afternoon of the 14th day of the first month, the only way that will always land on a full moon is if you started counting the month, the first day of the first month, from the conjunction. If you count from the visible sliver, Passover will come late after the full moon is already passed, and you might be 1, 2, or 3 days after the full moon. In other words, the moon would have already been full, beautiful, big, and bright, and then it starts to wane and get smaller, and then Passover happens. That doesn't seem right. That feels weird. Whereas counting the moon, starting from the conjunction, the Passover will always, always, always land on a full moon. And that's not all. Sukkot is in the 7th month. It's not on the 14th day. It's on the 15th day. Well, wouldn't you know? The way that the lunar cycles work, the full moon happens in the autumn months on the 15th day rather than the 14th day. So, wouldn't you know, Elohim didn't say, start Sukkot on the 14th day of the 7th month. He said, start it on the 15th day of the 7th month, and that is when the full moon is. In the fall, in the 7th month, the full moon occurs on the 15th day, the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, the 7-day feast. In the spring, Passover, The full moon occurs on the 14th day of the month, the first day of the 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread. So that's pretty powerful right there, especially when you think of the picture of walking out from Egypt, no longer slaves, but now free, and you've got beautiful white light shining across the landscape in the cool of the night, in the cool of the evening, to be able to start walking and start the journey. So start the month from the conjunction, and that's how you get to the full moon for Passover and also for Sukkot. And the year starts in such a way so that Passover is always very, very close to the equinox. And with that, the equinox is a specific point in time, a specific position point, rather, where the Earth's rotation around the sun, the Earth rotating around our star, called the sun, is that certain position. That is the spring equinox. There's a spring and there's a fall equinox. And if Passover is going to be too far from that, then the biblical way to handle that is to add a 13th month. So it's interesting. You got these variables. You don't exactly know whether your year is going to have 12 or 13 months in it. And in a given month, you don't necessarily know whether that month is going to have 29 or 30 days in it. So what do you do with birthdays? What happens if someone is born on the 30th day of the month and the following year that month doesn't even have 30 days? How do you do the birthday? What do you do if somebody is born in a year when there's a 13th month? The next year for sure is not going to have a 13th month. That 13th month won't happen again for another couple of years at least. So what do you do with those birthdays? All those people born during that time? Well, you don't do it. You just don't do the birthdays. Nobody in the biblical calendar was observing birthdays. I'm sure they knew, of course, what season they were born in and what year they were born in. People are generally keeping track of how many years they've lived, how long they've been alive. But it was not important to the children of Israel, the Hebrew people, before the first century or even during the first century, to keep a record of the specific day that they were born, because that's what the Roman solar and the astrological calendar was created for. It was created for astrology, for calculating birthdays according to the sun and the stars. And so that's why it was made to be a completely solar calendar without any lunar. The months, the so-called months in the Roman solar calendar, whether it's Gregorian or Julian calendar, those months have no relation to the actual lunar cycle. Some of the months have 31 days. There's no lunar cycle that ever is 31 days long. Not on this planet, not with this moon. It's never 31 days. It's always 29 or 30 days. February is given 28 days. There's never a real lunar cycle that's only 28 days long. It's just never going to happen. But those concepts of months in the Roman solar calendar, those are a loose concept of what a month is. It's vaguely, roughly equivalent to a lunar cycle, but not exactly. The Bible calendar follows the lunar cycle exactly, but not if you follow the Hillel 2 rabbinic calendar. Then it's going to be 29 or 30 days, which is what a lunar month should be. But specifically to the month, the rabbinic calendar might declare that a certain month has 29 days, when in reality it had 30. And likewise, the Hillel rabbinic calendar, which is only from modern Judaism ever since the year 359 AD. So that calendar might determine that a month has 30 days, when in reality that year, that month had 29 days. So it raises the question, does it really matter? Isn't this kind of finicky? Isn't this too much detail, too much information? Well, what we're talking about here is not Jewish feasts or feasts that only relate to Jewish people. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the feasts of Yud He Vav He, otherwise known as the feasts of Yehovah, the feasts of the Lord, the Creator, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the one who made everything. These are His feasts, and He's invited us to them. So don't we want to show up on the right day? If the president of Honduras invites you to a feast, do you want to say, nah, I'd like to reschedule? If the president of the USA, president of Russia, China, take a pick, prime minister or the president of any nation, let's talk about powerful nations, not so powerful nations. Either way, I think it would be kind of arrogant to say, no, I'd like to reschedule that feast. Why? This king, this prime minister, this president invited me for a feast. I'm going to clear my schedule and say yes. That's the right thing to do. How much more so for the king of the universe, the prime minister of everything that was ever made. So it only seems strange and finicky and like too much information, too much detail when we are coming from a background with a completely different calendar, and then everything gets weird, everything sounds funny. Well, that would be normal, since many of you are coming from a European Roman Empire background where it's a Roman solar calendar. There's many others of you coming from a Chinese background which has a lunar calendar. But again, it's not necessarily based upon the Bible. It's loosely based upon the lunar cycle. I think it's fairly strict with the lunar cycle. There's the calendar from Muhammad, which is lunar. And strangely, it doesn't go by the conjunction. It goes by the first visible sliver. So that's up to you if you feel like that counts as a point for or against the concept of the first visible sliver. The Mohammedan tribe was a moon-worshipping tribe originally, before they conquered a whole bunch of other Arabic tribes. And it makes sense that moon worshippers, that type of pagans, would be worshipping and celebrating the first visible sliver. Normally, pagans are worshipping things that are seen, things that are created, things that are visible. We, however, worship the unseen Elohim, the one who cannot be seen. And so it lines up, it makes sense that the month would start when the moon is unseen. The year begins unseen. The equinox is unseen, but it can be calculated when you know. So using the barley hunt as a way to start the year doesn't make sense either. The first visible sliver of the moon is a confirmation that the conjunction has already taken place. It's a confirmation. It was used traditionally as a confirming sign. The barley hunt was also used as a confirming sign that the year had begun. The year beginning is because of the equinox, and when the equinox is close by, for sure, the barley is going to be ripe, it's going to be ready for the sacrifice. So the barley is a confirmation of that. But to hunt for the barley, and you're going to find different levels of ripeness in the north, the south, from one country to another. No, it has to be in a certain part of Israel, and there's all kinds of arguments about that. Well, the equinox is a global event. There's no argument. No matter where you are on the globe, no matter what the temperature is where you are, the equinox is the same. No argument there. And so the first month of the year can begin according to the equinox, and the feast will begin first in Jerusalem, and then travel hour by hour according to the time zones around the rest of the surface of the globe after that. In other words, you're not going to have Malaysia celebrating Passover 6 or 8 or 10 hours, whatever it is, before Jerusalem, because of the sun setting earlier there than it sets in Jerusalem. The feasts are going to be celebrated first in Jerusalem and then go right around. The equinox determines the beginning of the year, and the conjunction, the lineup of the sun, the earth, and the moon, that determines the beginning of each month or each month. So I hope that clarifies a couple of things. This video has gone a little bit long, so I'm going to cut that. And thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.